Billionaire in-laws said she was barren and divorced her. Then she gave birth to triplets on his wedding day. The church bells were ringing so loud that Sarah could feel them in her chest. She stood at the back of St. Catherine's Cathedral, her hands resting on the stroller in front of her. Inside that stroller were 3 babies. 3 perfect, beautiful babies. Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth. Her daughters. Her impossible daughters. Through the tall wooden doors, she could hear the organ music starting to play. In just a few minutes, Daniel would walk down that aisle with his new bride. The woman his family had chosen for him. The woman who could give them what Sarah supposedly never could. An heir. A legacy. A future. Sarah's friend Rebecca grabbed her arm. "Sarah, we can still leave. You don't have to do this." But Sarah shook her head. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "They called me Barren, Rebecca. They threw me away like I was garbage. They need to see the truth." The organ music grew louder. The wedding was about to begin. Sarah took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy cathedral doors. The sound echoed through the massive church like thunder. Every single head turned to look at her. 300 people. 300 gasps. And there, at the altar, stood Daniel Blackwood. The man who had once promised to love her forever. The man who had signed the divorce papers without even looking at her. His face went completely white when he saw her. When he saw the stroller. When he saw the 3 tiny faces peeking out from under their blankets. His mother, Deborah Blackwood, stood up from the front pew. Her mouth fell open. His father, Abraham Blackwood, grabbed the edge of the bench to steady himself. And the bride, the beautiful Helena in her perfect white dress, looked like she might faint right there at the altar. Sarah smiled. Not a happy smile. A smile that said, "You were wrong about me. You were so very wrong." But before anyone could say a word, before the shock could even settle, one of the babies started to cry. Then another. Then the third. Their voices filled the cathedral, louder than the organ, louder than the bells, louder than anything. And that's when everything changed. So where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you want to know what happens next, you better hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started. But let me take you back. Back to where this all began. Back to when Sarah actually believed in fairy tales. 2 years earlier, Sarah Cohen had been sitting in a small coffee shop in downtown Manhattan, trying to make her laptop work. She was a secretary at a law firm, nothing fancy, just trying to pay her bills and maybe save enough money to go back to school someday. Her coffee had gone cold, and she was about to give up on the presentation she was working on when someone sat down across from her. "Your screen's frozen because you're running too many programs at once," the man said. He was handsome, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Close the browser tabs you're not using. That should help." Sarah looked up, surprised. "Oh, thanks. I'm not very good with computers." The man smiled. "I'm Daniel, and you look like you could use a fresh coffee." That's how it started. Simple. Easy. Daniel bought her a coffee. They talked for 2 hours. He made her laugh. He listened when she talked about her dreams of becoming a teacher. He didn't tell her that day that he was Daniel Blackwood, son of Abraham Blackwood, one of the richest men in New York. He didn't mention the family empire, the billion-dollar real estate business, the private jets and penthouses. He was just Daniel, and she was just Sarah. And for 3 perfect months, that was enough. But then he took her to meet his family. The Blackwood estate was like something from a movie. Sarah had never seen a house so big. It wasn't a house, really. It was a mansion, maybe even a castle. There were actual servants, actual chandeliers, actual portraits of ancestors on the walls. Deborah Blackwood was waiting in the sitting room. That's what they called it. Not a living room. A sitting room. She was a tall woman with perfect posture and eyes that could cut through steel. Next to her sat Abraham, Daniel's father, a man who looked like he'd never smiled in his entire life. "So you're the girl Daniel has been seeing," Deborah said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. The way you might observe a stain on a carpet. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said, trying to smile. "It's so nice to meet you." "Cohen," Abraham said, looking at some papers on the table in front of him. "That's a Jewish name, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "My family is Jewish." Deborah's eyebrow raised slightly. "How interesting." "Daniel, darling, you didn't mention that." Daniel squeezed Sarah's hand. "Does it matter?" "Of course not," Deborah said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We're very progressive. Very modern. Tell me, Sarah, what do your parents do?" Sarah felt her cheeks getting hot. My father was a teacher. He passed away when I was 16. My mother works at a grocery store. The silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. A grocery store, Deborah repeated slowly. How charming. That dinner was 3 hours long. 3 hours of Deborah asking questions that sounded polite but felt like attacks. 3 hours of Abraham barely speaking except to grunt occasionally. 3 hours of Sarah feeling smaller and smaller and smaller. But Daniel didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did notice and didn't care. Because 2 months later, he asked her to marry him. They got married at a small courthouse with just a few friends. Sarah had wanted something simple anyway, and Daniel said he didn't care about a big wedding. What mattered was that they loved each other. What mattered was that they were starting their life together. Deborah and Abraham didn't come to the wedding. They'll come around, Daniel promised. Once they get to know you, they'll love you as much as I do. Sarah wanted to believe him. She really did. They moved into Daniel's penthouse apartment. Sarah quit her job as a secretary because Daniel insisted she didn't need to work. You're a Blackwood now, he said. Blackwoods don't have wives who work. At first, it felt like a dream. Sarah spent her days reading, cooking, exploring the city. She made friends with some of the other wives in their building. She started taking piano lessons. She was happy, but Deborah and Abraham still wouldn't speak to her. Give them time, Daniel kept saying. They're just set in their ways. 6 months passed. Then a year. Sarah kept waiting for her in-laws to come around, but they never did. And then, slowly, she started to notice that Daniel was changing too. He came home later and later from work. He stopped asking about her day. He spent more time on his phone. When she tried to talk to him about it, he'd say he was stressed about business. His father was putting pressure on him. There were problems with the company. He needed space. And then one night, about 14 months into their marriage, Deborah called. Sarah, she said, her voice cold and formal. I think it's time we had lunch. Just the two of us. Woman to woman. Sarah should have known right then that something was wrong. Deborah Blackwood didn't do anything without a reason. They met at the Plaza Hotel. Deborah was already sitting at the table when Sarah arrived, looking perfect in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. Sit down, dear, Deborah said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Sarah sat. A waiter immediately appeared and poured water into crystal glasses. Deborah didn't waste time with small talk. You've been married to my son for over a year now. Yes, Sarah said quietly. And you're not pregnant. Sarah felt like she'd been slapped. We haven't really been trying yet. Daniel said we should wait until. Every month that passes is a month wasted, Deborah interrupted. The Blackwood family needs an heir. That's the entire point of marriage, dear. Surely you understand that. Sarah's hands were shaking. She put them in her lap so Deborah wouldn't see. We'll have children when we're ready. Deborah leaned forward. I'm going to be very direct with you, Sarah, because I think you deserve honesty. You are not the wife I wanted for my son. You come from nothing. You have no connections, no education, no breeding. But Daniel chose you, and I've tried to accept that. However, if you cannot even fulfill the most basic function of a wife, which is to provide children, then I'm afraid you are of no use to this family whatsoever. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. I want you to see a doctor, Deborah continued. A fertility specialist. I've already made an appointment for you next week. Dr. Morrison. He's the best in the city. You'll go, you'll get tested, and we'll find out if you're even capable of bearing children. And if I refuse? Sarah whispered. Deborah smiled. It was not a kind smile. Then I'll have no choice but to encourage Daniel to end this marriage. For the good of the family. For the future of the Blackwood name. Sarah stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to stand. I need to talk to Daniel about this. By all means, Deborah said. But I should mention that Daniel and I already discussed this last week. The appointment is scheduled for Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Dr. Morrison's office. Don't be late. Sarah barely remembers leaving the restaurant. She barely remembers the cab ride home. All she could think about was Daniel. Daniel had talked to his mother about her fertility, about her body, about whether she was capable of having children, without ever saying a word to her. When she got home, Daniel was in his study on the phone. She waited until he hung up, and then she confronted him. Did you talk to your mother about us having children? Daniel had the decency to look guilty. Sarah, she's just concerned. Did you tell her to make me a doctor's appointment without asking me first? It's not like that, Daniel said, standing up. Look, my parents have been on my case about this. About us not having kids yet. My mom suggested that maybe we should just check, make sure everything is okay. There's no harm in that, right? There's harm in treating me like I'm some kind of breeding animal. Sarah shouted. She never shouted, but she couldn't hold it in anymore. There's harm in discussing my body with your mother before discussing it with me. You're being dramatic, Daniel said, and his voice had an edge to it now. An edge she'd never heard before. This is important, Sarah. The family needs an heir. That's just reality. If there's a problem, we need to know about it. And what if there is a problem? Sarah asked. What if I can't have children? What then? Daniel looked away. He actually looked away from her. And in that moment, Sarah knew. She knew exactly what would happen. But she went to the appointment anyway. What choice did she have? Dr. Morrison was a thin man with cold hands and a colder manner. He ran tests. So many tests. Blood tests, ultrasounds, exams that made Sarah feel humiliated and exposed. And through it all, he barely spoke to her. He took notes on his clipboard and said things like MMM, and I see, but never explained what any of it meant. 2 weeks later, Sarah got a call to come back to the office for the results. She asked Daniel to come with her. He said he had a meeting. He said he'd call her afterwards to find out what the doctor said. Sarah sat in Dr. Morrison's office alone, in a chair that was too big for her, and listened as he explained that her hormone levels were abnormal, that her eggs weren't viable, that her chances of ever conceiving naturally were essentially zero. Barren, he said, writing something on a form. That's the technical term. I'll send the full report to Mrs. Blackwood as requested. To Deborah? Sarah asked. Not to me. She's the one who made the appointment, Dr. Morrison said, as if that explained everything. Sarah walked out of that office in a daze. She sat on a bench outside the building for an hour, maybe 2. People walked past her. Cars honked. The city moved around her like she wasn't even there. When she finally went home, Deborah was in her apartment. In her home. Sitting on her couch like she owned the place. Which Sarah supposed she technically did. The apartment was in Daniel's name. Everything was in Daniel's name. I received Dr. Morrison's report, Deborah said. No greeting. No kindness. Just straight to business. As I suspected, you are unable to bear children. Where's Daniel? Sarah asked. He's at the office. We thought it would be better if I spoke to you first. Woman to woman. Woman to woman, Sarah repeated numbly. Deborah stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the city below. I'm not a cruel person, Sarah. I want you to know that. But I am a practical person. The Blackwood family has existed for 4 generations. We've built an empire. And empires need heirs. Without children, without someone to pass everything on to, all of it means nothing. So what are you saying? Sarah asked, even though she already knew. I'm saying that this marriage cannot continue. Daniel needs a wife who can give him children. You cannot be that wife. Sarah felt something break inside her. Something that had been cracking for months finally shattered completely. Does Daniel know you're here? Daniel knows everything, Deborah said. He knows about the test results. He knows what needs to be done. He's just too kind-hearted to do it himself. So I'm doing it for him. I want to hear it from him, Sarah said. Very well. Deborah pulled out her phone and dialed. She put it on speaker. Daniel answered on the second ring. Mom, I'm here with Sarah, darling. She'd like to speak with you. There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice, quiet and distant. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Are you really going to do this? Sarah asked. Are you really going to divorce me because I can't have children? Another pause. Longer this time. I don't have a choice. The family. You always have a choice. Sarah screamed into the phone. You chose to marry me. You chose to love me. Or was that all a lie? It wasn't a lie, Daniel said, and he actually sounded sad. But this is bigger than us. This is about legacy. This is about duty. You wouldn't understand. You're right, Sarah said. I don't understand. I don't understand how you can be so cruel. She hung up the phone. Or rather, Deborah hung up the phone for her, plucking it from her hands. I'll have the divorce papers drawn up, Deborah said. You'll be well compensated, of course. We're not monsters. But I'll need you out of this apartment by the end of the month. And just like that, it was over. The divorce took 3 months to finalize. Sarah got a settlement. Not a huge one, but enough to rent a small apartment in Brooklyn and live for a while without working. Deborah's lawyers made sure Sarah signed a non-disclosure agreement. She couldn't talk to the press. Couldn't tell anyone about the family. couldn't damage the Blackwood reputation. Sarah signed everything. What else could she do? She moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment that smelled like old carpet and had a radiator that clanked all night. She stopped answering calls from her friends. She stopped going out. She spent most of her days in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had fallen apart so completely. Rebecca was the only person who wouldn't leave her alone. Rebecca, her best friend from high school, who had always been there for her. Rebecca came over every few days with food and refused to let Sarah wallow in complete darkness. "You need to eat," Rebecca would say, forcing containers of soup and pasta into Sarah's refrigerator. "You need to shower. You need to live, Sarah." "Why?" Sarah would ask. "What's the point?" "The point is that you're 26 years old and your life is not over just because some rich jerks decided you weren't good enough for them." But it felt over. It felt like everything good had been taken away. And then, about 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Sarah woke up feeling sick. Not sad sick. Actually sick. She barely made it to the bathroom before she threw up. And then she threw up again the next day. And the day after that. At first, she thought it was the flu. Or maybe food poisoning. But after a week of waking up nauseous, Rebecca dragged her to a walk-in clinic. The doctor was a young woman with kind eyes. She asked Sarah a bunch of questions, took some blood, and told her to wait. When she came back, she was smiling. "Congratulations," she said. "You're pregnant." Sarah stared at her. "That's impossible." "Well, it's not impossible," the doctor said, laughing a little. "The test is quite clear. You're about 8 weeks along, I'd estimate." "But I can't be pregnant," Sarah insisted. "I'm barren. A doctor told me." "I'm barren." The doctor's smile faded. "Who told you that?" "A fertility specialist. Dr. Morrison. He said my eggs weren't viable. He said I could never conceive naturally." The doctor frowned. She pulled up something on her computer. "Do you have a copy of those test results?" Sarah shook her head. "They were sent to my mother-in-law. My ex-mother-in-law." "Well, I don't know what Dr. Morrison told you, but you are definitely pregnant. Would you like to see the ultrasound?" Sarah couldn't speak. She could only nod. The doctor squeezed cold gel on her stomach and moved a wand around. And there, on the grainy black and white screen, was a tiny blob. A tiny blob with a heartbeat. "There's your baby," the doctor said softly. Sarah started crying. She couldn't help it. She sobbed so hard that the doctor had to get her tissues and wait for her to calm down. "I don't understand," Sarah kept saying. "I don't understand how this is possible." "Sometimes these things happen," the doctor said. "Medicine isn't perfect. Diagnoses can be wrong. Or sometimes the body just surprises us." Rebecca, who had been waiting outside, came rushing in when she heard Sarah crying. When Sarah told her, Rebecca's face went through about 17 different emotions in 5 seconds. "You're pregnant," Rebecca said slowly. "You're pregnant with Daniel's baby." "I think so," Sarah said. "I mean, there's no one else. We haven't been divorced that long." "Does he know?" Rebecca asked. Sarah shook her head. "I'm not going to tell him." "Sarah, he's the father. He threw me away." Sarah said. "He divorced me because I supposedly couldn't have children. He and his horrible mother humiliated me. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of knowing they were wrong. But what about the baby? Don't they deserve to know their father?" Sarah put her hand on her stomach, on the place where a tiny life was growing. A life that shouldn't exist. A miracle. "This baby is mine," she said firmly. "Only mine." Over the next few months, Sarah's body changed in ways she never expected. Her stomach grew. Her ankles swelled. She had cravings for pickles and ice cream at 2 in the morning. And through it all, she didn't contact Daniel. She didn't contact anyone from her old life. She went to her doctor's appointments alone, except for Rebecca, who came to every single one. At the 12-week ultrasound, the technician got very quiet. She kept moving the wand around, looking at the screen, typing things. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, her heart pounding. "Not wrong exactly," the technician said slowly. "But I'm going to need to get the doctor." Sarah's mind raced through every terrible possibility. Something was wrong with the baby. The baby was sick. The baby wasn't going to make it. But when the doctor came in and looked at the screen, she started laughing. "Well, this is unexpected," the doctor said. "You're having triplets." Sarah was sure she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Triplets. 3 babies. See, here's 1, here's 2, and there's number 3, hiding behind the others." The room started spinning. Sarah grabbed the edge of the examination table to steady herself. 3 babies. I'm having 3 babies. The odds of conceiving triplets naturally are extremely rare, the doctor said, sounding amazed. About 1 in 10,000. You're very lucky. Lucky. Sarah wanted to laugh. She'd been called barren. She'd been divorced for being unable to have children. And now she was having 3. I can't afford 3 babies, Sarah said, starting to panic. I can barely afford one. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't have a job. I don't have any money saved. How am I going to? Rebecca grabbed her hand. We'll figure it out, she said firmly. You're not alone in this. But Sarah felt very alone. Alone and terrified and completely overwhelmed. The pregnancy got harder. 3 babies meant 3 times the weight, 3 times the pressure on her body. By her 6th month, Sarah could barely walk. Her back ached constantly. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't breathe properly. The doctors put her on bed rest. Rebecca moved in with her to help. Rebecca, who was supposed to be starting a new job in Boston, gave it all up to take care of Sarah. She cooked, cleaned, and helped Sarah to the bathroom when she couldn't make it on her own. You don't have to do this, Sarah kept saying. Yes, I do, Rebecca would reply. That's what family does. And one day, while Sarah was lying in bed feeling like a beached whale, Rebecca came in with her laptop. Don't be mad, Rebecca said. Why would I be mad? Because I did something you're probably going to yell at me for. Rebecca turned the laptop around. On the screen was a social media profile. Daniel's profile. And right at the top was a post from 2 days ago. Excited to announce my engagement to Helena Morrison. She's the daughter of the renowned Dr. Morrison, and we couldn't be happier. Wedding set for June 15th at St. Catherine's Cathedral. Sarah stared at the screen. At the picture of Daniel and a beautiful blonde woman, both of them smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. Morrison, Sarah said slowly. Helena Morrison. As in Dr. Morrison's daughter. Rebecca nodded. I did some digging. Deborah and Dr. Morrison have been friends for years. They're in the same country club. And Helena just happens to come from a very prestigious family with very deep pockets. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. They planned this. Deborah and Dr. Morrison. They planned the whole thing. I think so, Rebecca said quietly. I think they always wanted Daniel to marry Helena. I think the fertility diagnosis was fake. I think they lied to you to get you out of the way. Sarah's hands started shaking. All those months of grief, of believing she was broken, of thinking her body had failed her. And it had all been a lie. A cruel, calculated lie. What are you going to do? Rebecca asked. Sarah looked down at her enormous belly, where 3 babies were growing. 3 impossible babies. 3 pieces of proof that she had been right all along. When's the wedding? Sarah asked. June 15th. Sarah smiled. It was not a nice smile. That's 2 weeks after my due date. And that's when the plan started forming in her mind. A plan for justice. A plan for revenge. A plan to show the Blackwood family exactly what they had thrown away. But first, she had to survive giving birth to 3 babies. The labor started at 3 in the morning on June 1st. Sarah woke up to a pain so intense she couldn't even scream. Rebecca called an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and panic, and Rebecca holding her hand and saying, "Breathe, Sarah, just breathe." The delivery took 18 hours. 18 hours of agony. 3 babies, each one fighting their way into the world. Miriam came first, screaming at the top of her lungs. Then Naomi, quieter but just as determined. And finally Ruth, the smallest of the 3, but with a grip so strong she held onto the doctor's finger and wouldn't let go. When they were all finally here, all finally safe, the nurses laid all 3 of them on Sarah's chest. 3 tiny, perfect miracles. 3 impossible daughters. They're beautiful, Rebecca said, crying. Sarah couldn't speak. She could only stare at her daughters and think about how Deborah Blackwood had called her barren. How Dr. Morrison had told her she would never conceive. How Daniel had thrown her away like she was worthless. And now she had 3 babies. 3 perfect, healthy babies. 3 pieces of proof that they had been wrong. She stayed in the hospital for a week, learning how to feed 3 babies at once, how to change 3 diapers in under 10 minutes, how to function on 2 hours of sleep. The nurses were amazed by her. They kept saying things like, "You're so strong," and "I don't know how you do it." But Sarah didn't feel strong. She felt exhausted. She felt overwhelmed. And she felt angry. On June 13th, 2 days before Daniel's wedding, Sarah brought her daughters home to her tiny Brooklyn apartment. Rebecca had set up 3 cribs somehow, squeezing them into the small bedroom. The apartment looked like a baby supply store had exploded in it. Bottles, diapers, blankets, tiny clothes everywhere. You should rest, Rebecca said. The wedding is in 2 days. If you still want to go through with this. I'm going, Sarah said firmly. Sarah, you just gave birth to triplets. You should be recovering, not planning some dramatic confrontation. But Sarah shook her head. They need to see. They need to know what they did to me. What they threw away. So on June 15th, while Daniel Blackwood was getting ready to marry Helena Morrison in the biggest society wedding of the year, Sarah Cohen was getting ready too. She put on a simple blue dress. She fed her 3 daughters. She strapped them carefully into their new stroller, making sure they were secure and comfortable. Rebecca drove her to St. Catherine's Cathedral. The same cathedral where Deborah and Abraham got married 40 years ago. The same cathedral where every Blackwood had gotten married for generations. Are you sure about this? Rebecca asked as they parked down the street. Sarah looked at her 3 sleeping daughters. Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth. Her impossible miracles. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They waited until they heard the organ music start. Until they knew the ceremony was about to begin. And then Sarah got out of the car, pushed the stroller up the cathedral steps, and reached for the door handle. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. She pushed open the door, and 300 people turned to stare. But what happened next? What happened when Daniel saw his 3 daughters for the first time? What did Deborah say? What did the bride do? Well, that's where things got really interesting. The sound of 300 people gasping all at once is something Sarah would never forget. It was like the whole church sucked in air at the same time and forgot how to breathe it back out. Sarah stood in the doorway, her hands gripping the stroller handle so tight her knuckles turned white. The afternoon sun was streaming through the stained glass windows behind her, making colored light dance across the floor. Red, blue, gold, green. It should have been beautiful. But right now, it just felt like the whole world was watching her. Daniel was frozen at the altar. Completely frozen. His mouth was open like he wanted to say something, but no words were coming out. Next to him stood Helena in the most expensive wedding dress Sarah had ever seen. It had so many crystals on it that it sparkled like a disco ball. Helena's face had gone from happy bride to confused to angry in about 3 seconds. But Sarah wasn't looking at Helena. She was looking at Deborah. Deborah Blackwood stood up from the front pew so fast her hat almost fell off. It was a ridiculous hat, big and purple with feathers. She looked like an angry peacock. Her face was red, her eyes were wide, and for the first time since Sarah had known her, Deborah Blackwood looked completely and totally shocked. What is the meaning of this? Deborah's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Who let you in here? Sarah didn't answer. She just started walking down the aisle. Slowly. 1 step at a time. The wheels of the stroller squeaked a little on the marble floor. Everyone turned to watch her pass. Women in fancy dresses covered their mouths. Men in expensive suits leaned forward to get a better look. Someone in the back whispered, "Is that his ex-wife?" Little Miriam woke up first. She made a small cooing sound, then started to fuss. Then Naomi joined in. Within seconds, all 3 babies were crying. Not screaming, just crying. That sad, confused baby cry that makes everyone want to help. The sound echoed off the high cathedral ceiling. It mixed with the organ music that was still playing because nobody had told the organist to stop. The poor man just kept playing the wedding march while 3 babies cried and 300 people stared, and one bride looked like she might explode. Sarah stopped walking when she was about halfway down the aisle. Right in the middle of the church. Right where everyone could see her. Right where everyone could see the stroller. "Hello, Daniel," she said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Daniel finally found his voice. "Sarah? What are you? Why are you?" "I thought you should know," Sarah said, and she reached down to adjust Miriam's blanket. "You're a father. 3 times over, actually." The gasping started again. Louder this time. Someone in the 3rd row said, "Oh my God." Someone else said, "Did she just say what I think she said?" Abraham Blackwood stood up next to his wife. He was a big man, tall and wide, and when he stood up it felt like a mountain was rising. "This is absurd," he boomed. "Remove this woman from the church immediately." But before anyone could move, before any of the ushers could figure out what to do, Helena spoke up. "Wait." Her voice was high and tight. She walked down from the altar, her big dress swooshing with each step. She came right up to Sarah and looked down at the stroller. Looked down at the 3 crying babies. For a moment, nobody said anything. Helena just stared at the babies, her face going through about 100 different expressions. Then she turned to Daniel. "Daniel," she said slowly, "are these your children?" Daniel was still standing at the altar, looking like he might pass out. I don't. Helena, I didn't know. Are these your children?" Helena said each word like it was its own sentence. Sarah bent down and picked up Ruth, the smallest baby. Ruth was still crying, her little face all scrunched up and red. Sarah held her close and looked straight at Daniel. "Do you remember that last month we were together?" Sarah asked. "February. Right before you served me with divorce papers. You came home late one night. You said you'd been drinking with your college friends. You came into the bedroom and you—" "Stop," Deborah hissed, rushing forward. "Stop talking right now." But Sarah didn't stop. "These are your daughters, Daniel. Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth. They were born on June 1st. If you do the math, that puts conception right around late February. Right around the time you were still my husband." The church erupted. Everyone started talking at once. The whispers turned into full conversations. Sarah heard snippets of what people were saying. "I knew the divorce was sudden. 3 babies, can you imagine? Poor Helena. But I thought she was barren." That last one made Sarah's blood boil. She raised her voice to be heard over the crowd. "That's what you told everyone, wasn't it?" She was looking at Deborah now. "That I was barren. That I couldn't have children. That's why you convinced Daniel to divorce me. You told everyone that I was useless. That I was broken." Deborah's face went from red to almost purple. "You need to leave. Now. Before I call the police." "Call them," Sarah said. "I'd love to explain to the police how your friend Dr. Morrison gave me a fake diagnosis. How he told me my eggs weren't viable when there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. How you and he planned the whole thing so Daniel could marry Helena instead." At the mention of her father's name, Helena's head snapped up. "What did you say about my father?" Sarah turned to Helena. For a second, she actually felt sorry for the woman. Helena hadn't asked to be part of this mess. She was just another pawn in Deborah's game. "Your father lied about my medical results," Sarah said quietly. "He told me I could never have children. And 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. With triplets." Helena looked at her father, who was sitting in the second row looking very uncomfortable. "Daddy, is that true?" Dr. Morrison stood up. He was sweating. Sarah could see the sweat on his forehead even from where she was standing. "Helena, sweetheart, it's not what you think. It was just a simple misdiagnosis. These things happen in medicine." "A misdiagnosis," Sarah repeated. "That's what you're calling it. Not a lie. Not a conspiracy. Just a hoopsie." Rebecca, who had been standing quietly near the back of the church, suddenly rushed forward with her phone held up. "I recorded it," she announced loudly. "I have Dr. Morrison on tape admitting that he falsified Sarah's test results. Want to hear it?" The church went completely silent. Even the babies stopped crying for a second, like they knew something important was happening. Dr. Morrison's face went white. You can't. That's illegal recording." "Actually," Rebecca said cheerfully, "New York is a one-party consent state, which means I only needed my consent to record our conversation. Would you like me to play it for everyone?" Deborah looked like she might have a heart attack right there in the church. Abraham grabbed her arm to steady her. Daniel just kept staring at the babies like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. But Helena was the one who spoke next. And what she said surprised everyone. "Play it." Dr. Morrison made a choking sound. "Helena, darling, we can discuss this later, privately." "Play the recording," Helena said again, louder this time. Her voice was shaking, but she wasn't crying. She was angry. "I want everyone to hear what my father did." Rebecca didn't need to be told twice. She pulled up the recording on her phone and turned the volume all the way up. Dr. Morrison's voice filled the cathedral, tinny but clear. "Mrs. Blackwood and I had an understanding. She wanted the girl gone, and I provided the medical justification. The test results were inconclusive at best, but I wrote them up to suggest infertility. It was a simple matter of adjusting the interpretation." "So you lied," Rebecca's voice said on the recording. "I provided a service to a valued client. Mrs. Blackwood's family has been very good to my practice over the years." The recording ended. For about 5 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And then all hell broke loose. Helena ripped off her veil and threw it on the ground. "You ruined someone's life so I could marry money," she screamed at her father. "You destroyed her marriage for a business deal?" People started shouting. Some were yelling at Deborah. Some were yelling at Dr. Morrison. One older woman in a pink dress stood up and announced that she was a lawyer and that this sounded like fraud. Another man said this was the most exciting wedding he'd ever been to. But through all the chaos, Sarah kept her eyes on Daniel. He finally walked down from the altar, moving like he was in a dream. He came right up to the stroller and looked down at Naomi and Miriam, the two babies still lying there. "Can I?" His voice cracked. "Can I hold one?" Sarah's first instinct was to say no, to tell him he didn't deserve to touch them. But then she looked at his face, really looked at it, and she saw something there she hadn't expected to see. Regret. Real, genuine regret. She shifted Ruth in her arms and nodded toward the stroller. "That's Miriam on the left and Naomi on the right." Daniel reached down with shaking hands and picked up Miriam. He held her so carefully, like she might break. Miriam stopped crying and looked up at him with big, curious eyes. Daniel's eyes. "She has my nose," he whispered. "They all do," Sarah said. "They have your eyes too. And your stubborn chin." A tear ran down Daniel's face. An actual tear. Sarah had never seen him cry before. Not once in their entire marriage. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." But before Sarah could respond, Deborah was there, pushing between them. "Don't you dare apologize to her," she hissed at Daniel. "Don't you dare make us look weak in front of all these people." Daniel turned to his mother, still holding Miriam carefully. When he spoke, his voice was different. Harder. "You lied to me. You told me she couldn't have children. You made me divorce her based on a lie." "I did what was best for this family," Deborah shot back. "That woman was never good enough for you. She was never one of us." "That woman is the mother of my children," Daniel said. 3 of them. DNA test. Abraham suddenly barked from his spot in the front pew. "We need a DNA test. For all we know, these babies could belong to anyone." That was it. That was the moment Sarah's sadness turned into pure rage. She walked right up to Abraham Blackwood, still holding Ruth, and looked him straight in the eye. "You want a DNA test? Fine. We'll do a DNA test. And when it comes back showing that these are Daniel's daughters, when it proves that your precious family threw away 3 of your grandchildren because of your prejudice and your lies, I'm going to make sure everyone knows. Every newspaper, every magazine, every person in New York City is going to know that the Blackwood family called me Barren and threw me away, and then I gave birth to triplets." Abraham's face turned red. "Are you threatening us?" "No," Sarah said calmly. "I'm promising you." The church doors burst open again. This time it was the priest, Father Michael, who had apparently been trying to figure out what all the commotion was about. He took one look at the scene in front of him, the crying bride, the man holding a baby at the altar, the 300 gossiping guests, the furious grandparents, and he raised his hands. "I think," he said loudly, "that we need to postpone this wedding." Helena let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You think?" And that's when things got really interesting, because what happened next, nobody could have predicted. Helena Morrison didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't faint like everyone probably expected her to do. Instead, she walked right up to Sarah, looked at the 3 babies, and said something nobody saw coming. "I want to help you." Everyone in the church went silent again. Even the babies seemed surprised. Sarah stared at her. "What?" Helena turned to face the crowd, still in her ridiculous sparkly wedding dress. "Everyone here needs to know the truth. My father and Mrs. Blackwood conspired to destroy an innocent woman's life. They lied. They cheated. They played God with someone's medical records. And for what? So I could marry into money." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Well, congratulations, Daddy. You've officially ruined my life too." Dr. Morrison tried to approach his daughter. "Helena, please, let's talk about this privately." "Don't come near me," Helena said, stepping back. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Deborah grabbed Helena's arm. "You're being hysterical. You're in shock. Let's go somewhere quiet and—" Helena yanked her arm away so hard that Deborah stumbled. "I'm not being hysterical. I'm being honest. Something none of you seem capable of." She turned to Daniel, who was still holding Miriam like he was afraid to let her go. "Did you love her? When you married Sarah, did you actually love her?" Daniel looked at Sarah, then back at Helena. "Yes, I did." "And you threw that away because your mommy told you to?" Helena shook her head. "You know what? I don't want to marry you. I don't want to marry a man who doesn't have the spine to stand up to his own family." The crowd gasped again. Sarah was starting to think that's all they knew how to do. Gasp and whisper and stare. Abraham stepped forward, his face red and angry. Now you listen here, young lady. You signed a prenuptial agreement. Your family and our family have business arrangements. You can't just walk away. Watch me, Helena said. She started walking toward the door, her dress trailing behind her like a white river. But then she stopped and turned back to Sarah. I mean it. If you need anything. A lawyer. Money. A witness for whatever lawsuit you're planning. Call me. She pulled a business card out of somewhere in her dress and handed it to Sarah. Then she walked right out of St. Catherine's Cathedral and didn't look back. For a moment, everyone just stood there in shock. Then the real chaos began. People started getting up from their pews. Some were leaving, probably to go gossip about what they'd just witnessed. Others were moving closer, trying to get a better look at the babies. A few older women were glaring at Deborah and whispering behind their hands. One woman, a lady Sarah recognized as Mrs. Patterson from the society pages, marched right up to Deborah. I always knew you were cold, Deborah, but this? Destroying a young woman's life? Faking medical records? That's not just cold. That's evil. How dare you, Deborah sputtered. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Mrs. Patterson snapped. And by tomorrow morning, everyone in New York will know too. She turned to Sarah. Dear, if you need a character witness, you call me. I've known the Blackwoods for 30 years, and I'd be happy to tell a judge exactly what kind of people they are. Other women started coming forward too. Women Sarah had never even met, offering support, offering to help, offering their disgust at what the Blackwoods had done. It was like watching dominoes fall. One by one, the people who used to worship the Blackwood family were turning against them. Abraham tried to take control. Everyone needs to leave. Now, this is a private family matter. Private? Someone shouted from the back. You made it public when you did it in a church in front of 300 people. Rebecca pushed through the crowd and came to Sarah's side. We need to go. Now, before this gets any worse. But Sarah wasn't ready to leave yet. She had one more thing to say. She walked up to Deborah, still holding Ruth. You called me Barren. You told everyone I was worthless because I couldn't give you grandchildren. You made me believe I was broken. You took away my husband, my home, my dignity. And for what? Deborah's eyes were like ice. For the family legacy. For the Blackwood name. The Blackwood name? Sarah looked around at the crowd, at all the people who were now looking at Deborah with disgust. Look around you, Deborah. Your precious family name is ruined. And you did it to yourself. She turned to Daniel, who was still holding Miriam, tears streaming down his face. I need her back now. Daniel looked down at the baby in his arms. Sarah, please. I know I don't deserve it, but please. Let me be part of their lives. Let me make this right. Sarah wanted to say no. She wanted to take her babies and walk away and never see him again. But then she looked at Miriam, looking up at her father with those big, curious eyes. She thought about Naomi and Ruth growing up without a father. She thought about how much she'd wished her own father had lived longer. We'll do the DNA test, she said quietly. And if it proves you're their father, then we'll talk. But don't think for 1 second that this means we're getting back together. You threw me away, Daniel. You can't just pick me back up because it's convenient. Daniel nodded, carefully handing Miriam back to Sarah. I understand. I'll do whatever you want. Whatever you need. What I need, Sarah said, is for you to tell the truth. All of it. I want you to go to every news outlet, every magazine, every newspaper, and tell them exactly what your mother did. I want everyone to know that the Blackwood family faked medical records to get rid of me. Deborah made a strangled sound. You can't be serious. That would destroy us. Our business, our reputation, everything. Good, Sarah said simply. Maybe then you'll understand how I felt. Abraham stepped forward, and for the first time he didn't look angry. He looked scared. What do you want? Money. We can give you money. Name your price. Sarah laughed. Actually laughed. You think this is about money? You think you can just throw cash at me and make this go away? She shook her head. I don't want your money, Abraham. I want justice. Justice. Deborah spat. You want revenge, that's what you want. You want to hurt us because we hurt you. You're right, Sarah said. I do want revenge. But I also want to make sure you never do this to anyone else. How many other women have you destroyed, Deborah? How many other lives have you ruined to get what you want? The crowd murmured. People were pulling out their phones now, recording everything. Sarah could see the little lights indicating that people were filming. By tonight, this would be all over social media. By tomorrow, it would be in every newspaper. The Blackwood empire was crumbling, and Sarah was watching it happen in real time. Father Michael, who had been standing quietly by the altar, finally spoke up. I think everyone needs to leave now. This church is a place of worship, not a courtroom. People started moving toward the exits, still talking, still filming, still gossiping. Sarah turned to leave too, but Daniel grabbed her arm gently. Wait, please. Just tell me their names again. I want to remember. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she pointed to each baby. Miriam, Naomi, Ruth. They're named after strong women from the Bible. Women who survived. Women who overcame. Like their mother, Daniel said softly. Sarah didn't respond to that. She just turned and walked toward the door, Rebecca helping her with the stroller. But before they could leave, Abraham called out. This isn't over. We'll sue you for defamation. We'll take those babies. We'll. Sarah stopped and looked back at him. Try it. Please. I'm begging you to try. Because I have Rebecca's recording. I have Helena as a witness. And now I have 300 people who saw you threaten me in a church. So go ahead. Take me to court. I dare you. She walked out of St. Catherine's Cathedral with her head held high, pushing her stroller with her 3 impossible babies, leaving behind the wreckage of the Blackwood family's perfect wedding day. Outside, the sun was shining. It was a beautiful June afternoon. People were walking by, normal people having normal days, completely unaware that inside that church, a whole family dynasty had just collapsed. Rebecca helped Sarah load the babies into the car. They were all crying again, probably hungry and tired and overstimulated from all the noise and chaos. That was incredible, Rebecca said, buckling Ruth into her car seat. You were incredible. Sarah's hands were shaking as she buckled Naomi in. I think I'm going to throw up. You're not going to throw up. You're going to go home, feed these beautiful girls, and then we're going to figure out our next move. Our next move? Sarah asked. You don't think this is over, do you? Rebecca said, grinning. This is just the beginning. We've got the Blackwoods right where we want them. Scared. Exposed. Desperate. Sarah looked back at the cathedral. Through the open doors, she could see Deborah and Abraham arguing with Daniel. She could see Dr. Morrison sitting alone in a pew, his head in his hands. She could see the crowd of guests streaming out, all of them on their phones, probably spreading the story far and wide. Part of her felt guilty. Part of her felt bad for causing such a scene. But then she looked at her 3 daughters, at Miriam and Naomi and Ruth, and she remembered what the Blackwoods had tried to take from her. You're right, she said to Rebecca. This is just the beginning. They drove back to Brooklyn in silence, the babies finally settling down and falling asleep in their car seats. When they got to Sarah's tiny apartment, there were already 7 messages on Sarah's phone. 3 from reporters. 2 from lawyers offering their services. 1 from Helena, asking if Sarah was okay. And 1 from a number Sarah didn't recognize. She played the voicemail on speaker while Rebecca helped get the babies inside. Ms. Cohen, this is Jennifer Walsh from the New York Times. I'm very interested in speaking with you about what happened today at St. Catherine's Cathedral. I believe your story deserves to be told. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Rebecca and Sarah looked at each other. Are you ready for this? Rebecca asked. Once you talk to the press, there's no going back. This becomes national news. The Blackwoods will fight back with everything they have. Sarah thought about the past year. About the divorce. About believing she was broken. About being thrown away like garbage. About giving birth to 3 babies alone, with no husband, no family, no support except Rebecca. She thought about Deborah's face when she'd seen the babies. About Abraham threatening to sue. About Daniel's tears. And then she picked up her phone and called Jennifer Walsh back. Hello, Ms. Walsh. This is Sarah Cohen. Yes, I'd love to tell you my story. When can we meet? As she scheduled the interview, as Rebecca made celebratory gestures in the background, as her 3 daughters slept peacefully in their cribs, Sarah Cohen made a decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to be quiet. She wasn't going to let the Blackwoods bully her into silence. She was going to fight, and she was going to win. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the Blackwoods had one more card to play. One more secret weapon that would change everything. And it was coming for her tomorrow. The next morning started with a knock on Sarah's door at 6 a.m. Sarah had been up since 4, feeding Naomi and trying to get Ruth back to sleep. Miriam was the only one still sleeping peacefully. When she heard the knock, her first thought was that it was probably reporters. Word had spread fast after the cathedral incident, and her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Rebecca, who had fallen asleep on the couch, jumped up. "I'll get it." But when Rebecca opened the door, it wasn't reporters. It was Daniel. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and puffy like he'd been crying all night. His hair was messy. He was wearing jeans and a wrinkled shirt, which was shocking because Sarah had never seen Daniel wear wrinkled anything in his entire life. "I know it's early," he said quietly, "but I needed to see you." To see them. Rebecca crossed her arms. "You've got some nerve showing up here after what your family did." "I know," Daniel said. "Rebecca, I know. But please. Just 5 minutes." Sarah came to the door, holding Ruth. "Let him in." "Sarah, are you sure?" Rebecca asked. "It's fine. He's their father." "Probably." Sarah stepped back to let Daniel in. He walked into the tiny apartment and looked around. Sarah saw him taking it all in. The 3 cribs squished into the small bedroom. The bottles and diapers everywhere. The cheap furniture. The peeling paint on the walls. This was where his daughters had been living while he'd been planning a wedding in a cathedral. "Sarah, He started, but his voice broke. He sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. "I can't stop thinking about what could have happened. You were pregnant. Alone. What if something had gone wrong? What if you'd needed help? What if?" "But nothing went wrong," Sarah said, sitting down across from him. "The babies are healthy. I'm healthy. We survived. Without you." Daniel looked up at her. "I left my parents' house last night. Packed a bag and walked out. My mother tried to stop me. She said I was choosing you over the family. I told her that's exactly what I was doing. What I should have done a year ago." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to feel happy that he was finally standing up to Deborah. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt and abandoned and called Barren, didn't trust him at all. "Where are you staying?" she asked. "A hotel for now. The Plaza. I know it's ridiculous, but I didn't know where else to go." He ran his hands through his hair. "Sarah, I want to make this right. I want to be a father to Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth. I want to support you. I want to." "Want to what?" Sarah asked. "Get back together? Play happy family? Pretend like the last year never happened." "No," Daniel said quickly. "I know that's not possible. I know I destroyed what we had. But maybe we could start over. As co-parents. As friends. I don't know. I just know I can't lose them. I can't lose you. Not again." Before Sarah could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Jennifer Walsh from the New York Times, right on schedule for their interview. Jennifer was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a recorder in her hand. She took one look at Daniel sitting on the couch and raised her eyebrows. "Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I was just leaving," Daniel said, standing up. "Actually," Sarah said, making a split-second decision, "maybe you should stay. Maybe you should tell Ms. Walsh your side of the story, too." Daniel looked shocked. "You want me to do the interview with you?" "You said you wanted to make things right," Sarah said. "Here's your chance. Tell the truth. All of it." So that's what they did. For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Daniel sat side by side on her tiny couch and told Jennifer Walsh everything. Sarah talked about the fake diagnosis, about Dr. Morrison's lies, about Deborah's cruelty. Daniel talked about how his mother had manipulated him, how he'd been too weak to stand up to her, how he'd thrown away the best thing in his life because he was afraid of disappointing his family. Jennifer took notes furiously. Her recorder captured every word. And when they were done, she sat back and whistled. "This is huge," she said. "This isn't just a society scandal. This is medical fraud. This is conspiracy. The Blackwoods are going to come after you both with everything they have." "Let them," Sarah said. The article came out the next day. Front page of the New York Times. The headline read, "Billionaire family accused of medical fraud to force divorce." There was a photo of Sarah holding the triplets. Another photo of Daniel looking serious and regretful. And a photo of Deborah and Abraham leaving the cathedral, both of them looking furious. The story went viral within hours. It was everywhere. Every news channel, every website, every social media platform. People were furious. They called the Blackwoods monsters. They called Dr. Morrison a criminal. They called for investigations and lawsuits and justice. Sarah's phone exploded with messages. Lawyers offering to represent her for free. Women's organizations offering support. Other women coming forward with their own stories of being mistreated by powerful families. It was overwhelming and terrifying and empowering all at once. But the Blackwoods didn't take it lying down. 3 days after the article came out, Sarah got served with legal papers. The Blackwoods were suing her for defamation. They were also filing for emergency custody of the triplets, claiming that Sarah was an unfit mother who was using the babies as weapons. Sarah called Helena, who had become an unexpected ally. Helena connected her with the best family lawyer in New York, a woman named Ruth Martinez who had never lost a custody case. "They don't have a leg to stand on," Ruth Martinez told Sarah at their first meeting. "You have proof of their fraud. You have witnesses. You have the recording. And you have 3 healthy babies who are clearly well cared for. No judge in their right mind is going to take those babies away from you." But Deborah Blackwood had one more trick up her sleeve. A week before the custody hearing, a woman showed up at Sarah's apartment. She was young, maybe 25, with long dark hair and nervous eyes. "My name is Leah," she said. "I used to work for the Blackwoods as a maid, and I have information you need to hear." Sarah let her in. Rebecca was there too, along with Daniel, who had been coming over every day to help with the babies. Leah sat down and pulled out a folder full of documents. "I was cleaning Mrs. Blackwood's office about 2 years ago, right around the time you and Mr. Daniel got married. I found these in her desk drawer. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after I read the article about what happened, I knew I had to bring them to you." She spread the documents on the coffee table. They were emails. Dozens of emails between Deborah and Dr. Morrison, dated from before Sarah had even met Daniel. Sarah picked up one of the emails and started reading. Her hands began to shake. "Oh my God," she whispered. The email was from Deborah to Dr. Morrison, dated 3 years ago. It read, "We need to discuss Daniel's future. He's becoming too independent, making decisions without consulting the family. I need your help ensuring that whoever he marries will be someone we can control. If he chooses poorly, I'll need you to provide medical justification for ending the marriage. We've worked together before. I trust this won't be an issue." Dr. Morrison's response was short. "Of course. Whatever the family needs." "They planned this from the beginning," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "Before I even met you, they were planning to destroy any marriage I made that they didn't approve of." Sarah kept reading. There were more emails. Emails about other women Daniel had dated. One woman had been told she had a genetic disorder that made her unsuitable for marriage. Another had been told she had a mental illness. All lies. All fabricated by Dr. Morrison at Deborah's request. "How many?" Sarah asked Leah. "How many women did they do this to?" "At least 5 that I know of," Leah said quietly. "Maybe more." Mrs. Blackwood kept files on all of them. She called it protecting the family legacy. Rebecca grabbed the emails. "This is evidence. This proves it wasn't just about you, Sarah. This was a pattern. A system. They've been destroying women's lives for years. Daniel looked like he might be sick. I dated some of those women. I cared about them. And my mother she just threw them away like they were nothing. We need to take this to Ruth Martinez," Sarah said, gathering up all the documents. "And we need to take it to the police. This isn't just civil fraud anymore. This is criminal." The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. But by Friday, everything had changed. The police opened an investigation into Dr. Morrison. The medical board suspended his license. 3 of the other women Deborah had targeted came forward with their own lawsuits. And the Blackwood family's business partners started pulling out of deals, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Abraham tried to do damage control, issuing statements about how he had no knowledge of Deborah's actions, but nobody believed him. Deborah herself refused to comment, hiding away in their mansion with her lawyers. On Sunday night, the night before the custody hearing, Daniel came to Sarah's apartment. He looked exhausted but also lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I'm testifying against my mother tomorrow. In court. Ruth Martinez asked me to be a witness for your side, and I said yes." Sarah stared at him. "You're going to testify against your own mother?" "She's not my mother anymore," Daniel said firmly. "A real mother doesn't destroy people's lives. A real mother doesn't lie and manipulate and hurt innocent women. What she did to you, to those other women, it's unforgivable." He pulled out a small box from his pocket and handed it to Sarah. "I'm not trying to win you back. I know I don't deserve that. But I want you to have this." Sarah opened the box. Inside was a key. "It's to a house," Daniel explained. "In Brooklyn. Near the park. 3 bedrooms, a yard, plenty of space for the girls. I bought it yesterday. It's in your name. Yours alone. No strings attached. You can live there with the babies, raise them in a real home, not this tiny apartment. Sarah felt tears starting to form. Daniel, I can't accept this. Yes, you can, he said. You deserve it. The girls deserve it. And I deserve to do at least one thing right. He stood up to leave, then paused at the door. I love them, Sarah. Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth. I know I haven't earned the right to be their father yet, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to. The custody hearing on Monday was short. Ruth Martinez presented all the evidence. The emails, the fake medical records, Leah's testimony, Daniel's testimony. The Blackwoods' lawyer tried to argue, tried to deflect, but there was too much proof. Too many witnesses. Too many lies exposed. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Peterson, took less than an hour to make her decision. I've seen many troubling cases in my career, Judge Peterson said, looking directly at Deborah and Abraham in the courtroom. But this might be the most disturbing. You didn't just lie to end a marriage. You systematically destroyed multiple women's lives over the course of years. You used medical fraud, manipulation, and abuse of power to control your son and harm innocent people. She turned to Sarah. Ms. Cohen, I'm granting you full custody of your daughters. Furthermore, I'm recommending that the district attorney's office pursue criminal charges against Mrs. Blackwood and Dr. Morrison for fraud and conspiracy. Deborah stood up, her face red. This is ridiculous. You can't. Sit down, Mrs. Blackwood, Judge Peterson snapped. Or I'll hold you in contempt. Abraham tried to speak. Your Honor, surely we can come to some arrangement. The only arrangement, Judge Peterson said coldly, is that you and your wife will stay at least 500 feet away from Ms. Cohen and her children at all times. Any violation of that order will result in immediate arrest. This hearing is adjourned. Sarah walked out of that courtroom holding Rebecca's hand, with Ruth Martinez on her other side. Daniel followed behind them, keeping his distance but there nonetheless. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in Sarah's face. Everyone wanted a statement. Sarah took a deep breath and spoke clearly. For any woman who has ever been told she's not good enough, for anyone who has been lied to or manipulated or thrown away by people in power, I want you to know that you can fight back. You can win. Justice isn't just for the rich and powerful. It's for all of us. The reporters shouted more questions, but Sarah was done. She walked away from the courthouse, got into Rebecca's car, and went home to her 3 daughters. Over the next few months, things settled into a new normal. Sarah and the babies moved into the house Daniel had bought. It was beautiful, with a big backyard and enough space for the girls to grow. Daniel came to visit 3 times a week, always respectful, always helpful, slowly building a relationship with his daughters. Deborah and Abraham were charged with fraud. Dr. Morrison lost his medical license permanently. The Blackwood business empire crumbled as partners and investors fled. Abraham ended up selling most of their assets to pay legal fees and settlements to all the women they had hurt. Helena became one of Sarah's closest friends. She started a foundation to help women who had been victims of medical fraud, naming it after Sarah's daughters, the Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth Foundation. And Sarah? Sarah went back to school. She became a teacher, just like she'd always dreamed. She taught first grade, helping young children learn and grow, giving them the support and encouragement she wished someone had given her during her darkest times. 1 year after the cathedral incident, on a warm June afternoon, Sarah was in her backyard watching Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth play in their baby pool. They were laughing and splashing, completely unaware of the battle that had been fought for them. Completely innocent and perfect and loved. Daniel was there too, helping Ruth fill a bucket with water. He looked over at Sarah and smiled. Not a romantic smile. Just a peaceful one. The smile of someone who had finally found his way back to doing what was right. They're beautiful, he said softly. Yes, Sarah agreed. They are. Rebecca came out of the house carrying a tray of lemonade. I got a call from Jennifer Walsh at the Times. She wants to do a 1-year follow-up story. You interested? Sarah thought about it for a moment, watching her daughters play. Then she shook her head. No, she said. I think our story has been told. Now it's time to just live it. And that's exactly what she did. Sarah Cohen, the woman who had been called Barren, who had been thrown away and forgotten, who had been told she would never be enough, raised 3 beautiful daughters. She taught countless children. She helped other women find their voices. She built a life full of love and purpose and joy. The Blackwoods faded into obscurity, their name becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and cruelty. But Sarah's name became something different. It became a symbol of strength, of resilience, of fighting back against injustice and winning. Years later, when Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth were old enough to understand, Sarah told them the whole story. She told them about the cathedral, about the lies, about the fight for justice. And she told them the most important lesson she had learned. You are never defined by what people say about you, she told her daughters. You are defined by how you rise after they try to knock you down. You are defined by your strength, your kindness, your courage. Never let anyone make you feel small. Never let anyone tell you that you're not enough. Because you are enough. You have always been enough. And you always will be. Miriam, Naomi, and Ruth grew up hearing that message. And they grew up strong, confident, and kind, just like their mother. They knew their story. They knew how they came into the world, born on a wedding day, proof of an impossible miracle, symbols of justice and truth. And they knew that no matter what challenges they faced in life, they came from a woman who had faced the impossible and won. Sarah Cohen's story didn't end in a cathedral with crying babies and shocked guests. It didn't end in a courtroom with a judge's ruling. It ended in a backyard on a sunny afternoon, with 3 daughters playing and laughing, with friends gathered around, with peace finally found after a long and difficult battle. She had been called Barren, but she had given birth to triplets. She had been called worthless, but she had proven her immeasurable worth. She had been thrown away, but she had picked herself back up, stronger than ever. And in the end, that was the real miracle. Not the babies, as impossible as they were, but Sarah herself. Her strength, her courage, her refusal to let the Blackwoods break her. She was the miracle. She always had been. She just had to fight to prove it. And prove it she did. The end. Thank you so much for following Sarah's journey from beginning to end. If this story touched your heart, if it made you angry, if it made you cheer, if it reminded you that you're stronger than you think, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you are enough. You have always been enough. You will always be enough.